Hello, friends. Thank you for joining once again on Premier League Museum podcast. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is emotional returns to Premier League. Yes, by now you must have guessed we are talking about Gareth Bale's return to Tottenham, which is at his twilight of his career. In this podcast, we will educate Premier League fans about all the emotional returns that have happened so far in English Premier League. And with me, I have my guest, Premier League expert and a very active contributor on Premier League Museum. Please join me in welcoming Swamil. Hey Swamil, welcome to Premier League Museum podcast.
Thank you so much, Prashant. I think the word expert is a little too kind from your side, but yes, always glad to be on the podcast. It's a return for me on the podcast as well. So it's a perfect chance since we're discussing the returns of the players to their old teams.
I mean, we all talk about transfers, we all talk about the fact that how much money the players are earning, but ultimately for us, the Premier League fans, it has all been about the emotions that have been involved. What can you tell us about the fact that when you as a Premier League fan hear about a person who has grown in your club and finally coming back and returning to help you when you most need it? What do you feel about that?
Well, as you said, players coming back to their old clubs, it's a very emotional, it's a very romantic idea. Whether that really works on the field, it's a different debate. But anytime a past player is coming back to their old club, it's a beautiful story. I mean, I am a supporter of Manchester United, and for years we have had this thing about whether Cristiano Ronaldo will come back, and it's just the thought of someone who left us a few years ago coming back. It's just beautiful. And the fans, whether they are from a club that is lower down the food chain or a club like United, a past player coming back to the club is brilliant. And as you said, Twitter has just gone into meltdown in the last couple of days since we are expecting Gareth Bale to come back, and the way he left, he was a fan favorite at Spurs, and now Mourinho, someone who has been trying to sign him for every single club he's been at in the last few years, and finally, the perfect match, Gareth Bale, Jose Mourinho in Tottenham. So yes, really excited.
Gareth Bale played between 2007 to 2013. Do you have any favorite memories from his Tottenham career?
Yes, I do. Before I come to the memory, there is just this very, just talking about, fortune and, stroke of luck. I mean, very few people would know this, but, when he was at Tottenham, he was almost sold by Harry Redknapp to Birmingham as a left back at one point of time, and he was even willing to send him out on loan. But, player injuries and everything worked out in a way that he couldn't do that. And rest is history. But my first and probably the best memory I have of the Welshman was he scored a hat-trick against, I think it was Inter Milan, during his time at Tottenham Hotspur. I think Spurs were down 3-0 or 4-0 after just half an hour, and they had their goalkeeper sent off as well. And then Gareth Bale scored a hat-trick for Spurs, and that literally revived their whole season. And then he went on to have a couple of great years at the club, and that was really his breakout moment in European and world football. So that's just one of the best memories that I have of him.
So coming to the emotional returns, and this is our main topic for this particular podcast, there have been many more players who have actually made those emotional returns. So let's get started. First of all, we have Andy Carroll. So Andy Carroll played in Newcastle between 2007 to 2011. Liverpool came up. Unfortunately, it did not turn out to be so well, so he went to West Ham, then came back to Liverpool, again joined West Ham for a good number of years, and finally he made an emotional return to Newcastle in 2020. Pretty much he finds a home in Newcastle. Would that be right, Somil?
Absolutely. He's been, one of those patronizing figures that, divides opinion, whomever you speak with. I mean, the way he got transferred to Liverpool, I believe it was the time it was in a winter transfer window. Chelsea came in for Torres, and, I think Andy Carroll went for somewhere around £35 million on literally the last few minutes of the transfer window, 31st January. I think it was very late in the day. And it was just one of those signings that should have never happened for all parties. It didn't work out. I mean, Carroll, the kind of attention that he got, and the injuries. And he's been unfortunate with injuries all the time. But even though he hasn't scored a goal since coming back to his old club, I think he really looks at home. When you see his interviews and when you see him talking about coming back to Newcastle, it really feels as if he's found his home once again. He's found that love for the game, and that goes a long way when recovering from injuries and wanting to get back on the field. So yes, it's a brilliant time for him to come back, and hopefully he'll be back amongst the goals very soon.
So the next one we are going to talk about is, I know that his team is no longer with the Premier League anymore, and that was the surprise of 2019-20 season, which was Watford getting relegated. But Ben Foster, I'm not sure how many fans are actually aware, he actually started with Watford, and then obviously he was a Manchester United player.
In fact, Ben Foster was, I think, there used to be a joke going around that he's forever on loan. Because I think when he was at Watford for the first time around, he was there, he joined as a loanee from Stoke, I think. Mm-hmm. And during his time at Stoke, he went on to 6 different clubs on loans. And finally, Watford was the place where he settled down before making that move to United. It didn't really work out for him at United. He was basically a backup goalkeeper, and finally he went back after all these years to Watford. And last season, I mean, I remember doing an article when Watford got relegated, and they didn't really have a chance to say goodbye to the fans. Ben Foster had a very emotional message, and it was genuine. You could see the pain and the hurt in his statement that he couldn't say goodbye to the fans, because at that point of time it wasn't confirmed that he will be staying with the club or not. So it's a brilliant story. It probably hasn't ended the way it should have, but regardless of that, it's a brilliant story for the player and the club.
That's right. And Ben Foster, obviously, after leaving Manchester United, where it did not, as you said, it did not turn out well, actually joined few other clubs like West Bromwich. I think he spent number of years at West Bromwich, even a spell at Birmingham City as well. And finally, he found an emotional return, or his prodigal home at Watford again, and that's where he got stabilized. And obviously, the story continues with the thick and thin of the club's fortune, where unfortunately they got relegated last season. The next player we are going to talk about is Henning Berg, the Norwegian. This Norwegian player, and it's very surprising stat that Henning Berg actually played for Blackburn between 1993 to 1997. He was part of the champion winning side of Blackburn, and 97 Manchester United, and that was a period when Blackburn wasn't doing really well, and that's when Manchester United pulled him up, and he played for 3 seasons for Manchester United, and but eventually he found his true home again at Blackburn. And
Henning Berg has a very, very rich haul of trophies that he's won. I mean, I think Blackburn Rovers under Kenny Dalglish is one of those teams that gets least recognition, because they weren't a team that revolutionized the play, or they weren't really different. They were just a throwback version of when Leicester won the Premier League. But he was a very important player for them as well. When he came to United, he was he didn't play as much as he should have, and of course the players that United had was the reason. But he went back to Blackburn,
and that's exactly why we love this league, because it has got so many of those emotional stories and angles to it, and I wish all the Premier League fans would appreciate that we at Premier League Museum are making our best efforts to give you all those hindsight stories in the past as well as present, because it's just so emotional.
Yes, absolutely. There are some stories which are not often talked about, but when you go deep down, and I think the fans of those clubs will know there are some beautiful stories, and all around all the clubs in Premier League, and it's just fantastic. Yes,
that's right. All right, so the next player we want to talk about is a guy who is more known for Chelsea, being a Mr. Chelsea, but the fact that exists is that he had an emotional home at surprise, West Ham. Joe Cole, he started off his career with West Ham United. He was the upcoming star, and that's when Chelsea, in a revolution of Roman Abramovich, picked him up, and he played good number of years under Mourinho and other managers, and then he had a stint at Liverpool before he came back to return at the age of 32. At the twilight of his career, he came back to West Ham again and played for a couple of seasons there. So Joe Cole is a pretty interesting story, and he had a very interesting career as well.
These days we see a lot of news about Declan Rice, being a Chelsea target. But it's a similar path. I mean, West Ham and Chelsea have had a very bitter relationship in the past. It's a huge derby in London, and Joe Cole, in fact, he rejected a deal at West Ham to force a move through to Chelsea. Something which is haunting West Ham fans still, because the amount of success that he went on to achieve with Chelsea, and then eventually he came back to the club. But you see Frank Lampard, he had a similar pathway as well. Now, I mean, Declan Rice, he was a Chelsea academy graduate. Now he went to West Ham, and now he's supposedly going back as well. So West Ham fans, whenever you speak with one, they always talk about this. If they could have held on to some of the brilliant players like Cole for a little longer, the fortunes of the club would have been much different.
I agree. Yep. All right, moving ahead. Phil Jagielka, yes, he's one of the current playing players who is still playing for Sheffield United. And Everton came calling under David Moyes, and he obviously became one of the pillars of the defense under David Moyes.
Yes, absolutely. For younger Premier League fans, I mean, a lot of them wouldn't know if Jagielka played for any other club, because since we've been watching, it's always him in Everton. David Moyes liked him so much that, and United fans have a joke going around that when Moyes came to United, he was asking United defenders to watch videos of Phil Jagielka in order to prepare for the games. Yes, but he played quite a while for Sheffield United. And he literally didn't want to go when Sheffield United went down. They got relegated. He actually didn't want to leave the club, and I think it was Brian Robson that advised him to take a move to another club. And he was a record sale for the club, because he was very much adamant of the fact that if I'm leaving the club, the club has to force me out, and they have to get very good money. So it's a lesser known fact about him, but he's a Sheffield United player through and through. And interesting for him, he was born in Manchester and moved to Sheffield. So that's again another rivalry, a Lancashire-Yorkshire rivalry that he has in his blood. But then he moved to Merseyside, and now finally back with the Blades.
And the next one we are going to talk about is Stewart Downing. So Stewart Downing played for Middlesbrough between 2002 and 2009, and there was a good set of career that he played with Middlesbrough, and then obviously he gained a lot of importance because of the skills that he brought. He joined Aston Villa and then Liverpool. He joined few clubs in between, but it was Middlesbrough when they were back to the Premier League, and that's when he came back to help Premier League club Middlesbrough at that time.
The very loyal servant of the club, similar to Jagielka, when he joined Middlesbrough at a time, for the second time around, when the club wasn't really doing well. Eventually they got relegated, and he was released, but he was more than happy to take a pay cut and carry on playing for them as well. So it's just another fantastic story at a club which doesn't get a lot of news, doesn't get a lot of attention, but and a brilliant player on his day. I mean, he could have been playing for any of the big clubs, and he would have got so much more recognition and so much more attention than he did. So he's one of those underrated players that doesn't get often talked about.
Yep, and one of the missing players I do see here is Juninho. I think Juninho we could not cover because he was not one who switched Premier League clubs, but one of those players who actually was a Middlesbrough legend, and he left and he joined back Middlesbrough when the calling came.
Absolutely. He said in one of the interviews that he could not believe how much love and affection the fans of Middlesbrough had given him. I mean, if you see the early years of Premier League, there are very few players who changed the way football was being played. And you talk about Eric Cantona and Dennis Bergkamp, but Juninho is one of those players that really changed the way football was played in the country, and he was really a big popular figure. On the T side, he was just next to God, if you can say so. And yes, another player that the current generation wouldn't really know much about, but a fantastic player. And yes,
that's right. All right, moving ahead. Now we have Teddy Sheringham. So I know that a lot of Manchester United fans, and I can see the smile on Somel's face, link him with the treble, the season where Manchester United won the treble, but Premier League fans wouldn't know that he was actually a star of Tottenham. He played good number of years at Tottenham, and just like Henning Berg, he joined Manchester United in the time when Sir Alex Ferguson probably had a say on any club if he wanted a certain player. And eventually, when he was old in the twilight of his career, once again at the age of 36, he joined back Tottenham again.
Yes, he did. And as you said, Sheringham has this, a very positive sort of a black hole moment when, he scored that goal in the Champions League final and assisted for the winning goal for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So, everyone, whenever you talk about Teddy Sheringham, it's that goal and for Manchester United. But, he's one player similar to him in the Premier League now is Harry Kane, and someone who probably hasn't made that correct move at the correct time. But as you said, he's played a lot of games in Premier League. He scored a lot of goals. I think over 150 goals in Premier League, if I'm not wrong, or somewhere thereabouts. So he was one of the very good strikers, very prolific strikers at the time. I think from 92, 93, he was there with Tottenham for quite a while. I think it was around 6-7 years that he was with the club, and then went back once again. And he had a very good record as well. So, one of those players that, loved, he was through and through Tottenham, just loved the club, absolutely. I think Tottenham at that time had such a big churn of managers that, every single season they would, bring in a new manager. But he stuck with them and finally left for United and achieved what he did.
And finally, we are going to talk about a player whom I think at least the recent Premier League fans have grown up with idolizing. And yes, we are talking about Wayne Rooney. I think Premier League fans would very well think of him as through and through Manchester United player, that he has won he has actually won everything, whether it's FA Cup, whether it's the Premier League, whether it's the Champions League, whether it's the Europa League, League Cup. Everything has been won by him under Manchester United. But the fact is that he was a boyhood Everton fan. Everton was where he showed his brilliance. I mean, I can't forget the goal that he had against Arsenal. Manchester United picked him up for the budding team, the young team that Sir Alex Ferguson was creating at that time, and he spent good number of more than a decade in fact at Manchester United. Everton was his personal home, and he joined back Everton for a season in 2018. So Wayne Rooney is one of those players who has actually again made an emotional return, and he had a very similar kind of frenzy as Gareth Bale had.
Oh, absolutely. Wayne Rooney, the thing is, in the last few years, we have, gotten too used to Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo putting up ridiculous numbers that, people often forget what a beast of a player Wayne Rooney was. I think Wayne Rooney, for a good 3-4 years, was probably the best player on the planet. I mean, he was an absolutely genius. Was a young prodigy, and, his legs probably ran out by the time he was 31, 32. But a fantastic player. And, as you said, the first goal everyone remembers of him was that, 30-yard strike against Arsenal. I remember my first phone back in 2005-06, when I got one, had this clip pre-installed by the carrier. And, I remember watching it like 10 times a day and trying to emulate that whenever I played. But yes, and a very, very amazing thing about him, or, his return to Everton. Like, we're talking about players going back to certain clubs. But, very interesting thing is he went back to Everton. And the first goal he scored was against Manchester City at Etihad. And there was a
Yes.
very interesting picture that came out that a father son, a City fan father son, few years ago when Rooney scored at Etihad for United, he was celebrating, and the same duo was just giving him out a mouthful on the touchline. And a few years later he scored for Everton, and he was just doing this shut up sign to City fans, and the same father son duo, a little older, but had similar sort of words for him, and he actually captured it and posted it on his social media that it's great to see the familiar faces back. And everyone would have liked to see him play a lot more for Everton, but I think he's still playing, and I think he's going to be a great manager as well, and he's really matured, still playing. And still, I mean, you see him playing these days, and you just remember what a brilliant player he was.
That's the beauty of Premier League, that it's the emotional angle, it's the emotions, the emotion which players bring in, not just for their own career, but also for the club, the batch that they are playing for. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. All right. So, how did you find our podcast? Do let us know. This was something which we thought Premier League fans would definitely would love to enjoy, would love to know, and would love to get to feel that yes, Premier League is not just about emotional return of Gareth Bale. It has been an emotional return for many players out there. And I want to thank once again Somil for taking out time to join us and giving us those brilliant trivias and pieces of updates on different players that came back on their careers. Thank you, and parting words from Somil.
Yes, it was a really enjoyable trip down the memory lane. I'm sure we would have missed out a lot of players. I, you know, Thierry Henry's return to Arsenal was one of those moments as well. I think the goal that he scored on his return was in FA Cup or a cup tie against Leeds. But just that memory of him celebrating in front of Arsenal fans, and there have been a lot of players who probably didn't leave for the club, but they had some other issues. I mean, I remember Darren Fletcher had a long-term illness that he came back from. I think there was another player from Newcastle a couple of years ago as well. So there are some brilliant stories, and we would like to hear if any of the club, any of the players that we have missed out. So if there is another player that we would love to hear from you.
And before
Yes,
we
thank
leave,
you
I
so
would
much.
say please do come to our website premierleaguemuseum.com. You have fantastic stories from Sawmill and all of other contributors on the website, as well as a history of all the players, the present, all the daily news of what's going on in Premier League, not just for top six, but every club. If you're a Brighton fan, if you're a West Ham fan, if you're a Chelsea fan, if you're a Southampton fan, you can find all the news on premierleaguemuseum.com, as well as please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will continue to bring you stories, but do give us some love by being a subscriber on our YouTube channel, and follow the Twitter handle, and also like our Facebook page. Thank you.